The water is black. Not the black of night, the black of oblivion. 2,000 feet deep. Cold enough to kill in 15 minutes. The stars above are so bright they seem close enough to touch, reflected in the glassy surface like shattered diamonds. The air is 28 degrees Fahrenheit. The sea 28 degrees, just 2 degrees above freezing. There is no wind, no waves, only silence. And then, at 2:20 in the morning on April 15, 1912, the silence breaks. The RMS Titanic, the largest moving object ever built by human hands, slips beneath the North Atlantic. 8 city blocks long, 11 stories tall, gone. It takes 2 minutes and 40 seconds for the stern to follow the bow into the deep. The suction pulls deck chairs, wooden panels, bodies, down with it. Then the ocean closes over the wound like it was never there, like the ship was never there, like the 2,200 souls aboard never existed at all. But 1,500 of them are still here, in the water, screaming. The sound, survivors would later say, was unlike anything they had ever heard. Not one voice, not 100, 1,500 voices crying out at once. A roar, a chorus of agony that traveled across the flat black mirror of the ocean for miles. Some called for help. Some called for God. Some called for their mothers. Children screamed for parents who were already dead. Men shouted their wives' names into the void. Women clutched babies who had stopped breathing. The lifeboats, 20 of them, rowed away. Most were half empty. Lifeboat number 1 had a capacity of 40, carried 12. Number 6 could hold 65. It held 28. In total, the lifeboats could have saved 1,178 people. They saved 710. More than 400 seats floated empty on the water while 1,500 people died within sight of them. If you are drawn to the darkest corners of history, to the moments we wish we could forget but never can, subscribe. Because what happened in that water, in those 2 hours between the sinking and the rescue, is something most of the survivors never fully escaped. 5th Officer Harold Lowe was one of the few who rowed back. He gathered 5 lifeboats together, redistributed the passengers to make room, and returned to the wreckage field 40 minutes after the ship went down. By then, most of the voices had stopped. He described what he saw. Bodies everywhere, floating face down in lifebelts, arms outstretched as if still reaching for something, frozen solid. He pulled 4 people from the water. Only one was still alive. Lowe said the hardest part was not the bodies. It was the silence, where 1,500 voices had been screaming minutes before. Now there was nothing, just the creak of oars, the lap of water against the boat, the occasional groan of a wooden deck chair drifting past. He said it felt like rowing through a graveyard, except the dead were not buried. They were watching. In lifeboat number 4, 8-year-old Marshall Drew sat with his aunt. He did not speak. He did not cry. He stared at the water. Years later, he would describe what he saw. A man floating face up, eyes open, staring at the stars. A woman in a white nightgown, her hair spread around her like seaweed. A steward still wearing his uniform, his arms locked around a deck chair. Marshall's aunt covered his eyes, but he had already seen, and he would see it again every night for the rest of his life. Charlotte Collier sat in lifeboat number 14 with her 8-year-old daughter. Her husband had gone down with the ship. She watched the spot where the Titanic disappeared and waited for him to surface. He never did. Around her, the bodies drifted closer. Some bumped against the lifeboat. Passengers used oars to push them away. One woman fainted. Another vomited over the side. Charlotte held her daughter and whispered that everything would be all right. But she knew it was a lie. Nothing would ever be all right again. The cold was the killer. Hypothermia sets in within minutes in 28-degree water. First, the body pulls blood away from the extremities to protect the vital organs. Fingers and toes go numb, then arms and legs. The heart slows. Breathing becomes shallow. Confusion sets in. Many of the dead were found with smiles on their faces, not because they were at peace, because hypothermia in its final stages causes a sensation of warmth. The dying remove their clothes, they relax, they stop struggling, and then they stop. Most of the 1,500 in the water were dead within 20 minutes, but not all. Some, wearing life belts, stayed afloat for an hour, 2 hours, unconscious, frozen, drifting. The survivors in the lifeboats could hear them, the occasional moan, a cough, a whisper, but they did not go back. They were afraid the desperate swimmers would capsize the boats, afraid they would be pulled under, afraid of the hands that would grab at them in the dark. Lifeboat number 6 was commanded by Quartermaster Robert Hichens, the man who had been at the wheel when Titanic struck the iceberg. He refused to row back. When passengers begged him to return, he shouted them down. He said the people in the water were already dead, that going back would only add to the body count. Margaret Brown, later known as the unsinkable Molly Brown, argued with him. She wanted to go back. She said there were empty seats. Hichens drew a knife and threatened to throw her overboard. The boat did not go back. Years later, Hichens would be asked about that night, about the screaming, about the decision not to return. He said nothing. He stared at the floor. His hands shook. In 1933, 21 years after the sinking, Robert Hichens shot himself in the head. His suicide note mentioned the Titanic. He said he still heard the voices. Every night. He said they never stopped. Second Officer Charles Lightoller was the highest-ranking officer to survive. He spent 2 hours in the water, clinging to an overturned lifeboat with 30 other men. Beneath them, bodies drifted past. Some were people they knew, crew members, passengers, friends. Lightoller ordered the men not to look down, to stare at the horizon, to sing. They sang hymns. Abide with me, nearer my God to thee. Their voices barely rose above a whisper. They were singing to keep from screaming. When the rescue ship Carpathia arrived at dawn, Lightoller was pulled from the water unconscious. He woke 3 hours later and asked how many had been saved. 710, they told him. Out of 2,200. He closed his eyes. He did not open them again for 2 days. For the rest of his life, Lightoller refused to talk about what he had seen. He told his children the Titanic was a glorious ship, that the crew were heroes, that the passengers were brave. He never mentioned the bodies. He never mentioned the screaming. He never mentioned the cold. And he never, not once, went swimming again. Eva Hart was 7 years old. She survived in lifeboat number 14 with her mother. Her father drowned. Eva remembered the sound. She said it was like standing next to 1,000 people at a football match, all shouting at once. Except they were not cheering. They were dying. She said the sound rose and fell in waves. At first it was loud, a roar that filled the entire sky. Then it faded. Then it came back. Then it faded again, until there was nothing, just the wind, and the stars, and the terrible, suffocating silence. Eva Hart never slept well again. She refused to travel by ship. She developed a fear of water, of the dark, of silence. She said the silence was worse than the screaming, because when the screaming stopped, that meant they were gone. All of them, 1,500 people, dead in the space of 2 hours. Less time than it takes to watch a movie. And for the rest of her life, whenever Eva Hart closed her eyes, she was back in that lifeboat, listening, waiting, terrified that the screaming would start again. Lawrence Beasley was a science teacher. He survived in lifeboat number 13. He wrote a book about the sinking, published less than a year after the disaster. In it, he described the wreckage field in clinical detail. The icebergs in the distance, glowing pale blue in the starlight. The deck chairs and luggage scattered across the water. The bodies, hundreds of them, floating motionless in their life belts. He wrote that some looked peaceful. Others looked terrified, mouths open, eyes wide, frozen in the moment of death. But Beasley also wrote something else, something he later tried to have removed from reprints of the book. He wrote that as Lifeboat 13 rode away from the wreckage, he looked back, and he saw, floating among the bodies, a young woman. Blonde hair, white dress. She was alive. She was waving. He shouted to the others. They ignored him. They kept rowing. Beasley stood and screamed, "Turn back. There is someone alive. Turn back." But the woman in charge of the boat told him to sit down. She said he was seeing things, that there was no one there. Beasley sat. He looked back one last time. The woman was gone. He never knew if she had been real, or if the cold and the shock had made him see something that was not there. Either way, he never forgave himself. The crew of the Carpathia arrived at 4 o'clock in the morning. The sun had not yet risen. Captain Arthur Rostron described what he saw. A field of wreckage stretching for miles. Deck chairs, life rings, luggage, and bodies. So many bodies, floating in clusters, drifting alone. Some still moving slightly with the current, as if they were sleeping. Others locked in place, frozen into statues. Rostron ordered his crew not to recover the dead. Only the living. There were too many, and there was nowhere to put them. The bodies were left behind. The survivors were pulled aboard one by one. Most were silent. Some were hysterical. A few were catatonic, staring at nothing, unable to speak. The crew wrapped them in blankets, gave them hot tea, led them below deck. Many refused to go inside. They stood on the deck and stared back at the wreckage field, at the place where the Titanic had been, as if they were waiting for it to reappear, as if they could not believe it was really gone. One survivor, a young woman named Madeline Astor, was pregnant. Her husband, John Jacob Astor, one of the richest men in the world, had gone down with the ship. She sat on the deck of the Carpathia, wrapped in a blanket, and did not move for 6 hours. When someone finally spoke to her, she asked if they had found him, if they had pulled him from the water. They told her no. She nodded. She did not cry. She stared at the ocean, and she stayed there, staring, until the sun went down and someone carried her inside. For months later, she gave birth to a son. She named him John Jacob Astor. She never remarried, and she never spoke publicly about the Titanic. Not once. Jack Thayer was 17 years old. He jumped from the deck of the Titanic as it sank and swam to the overturned lifeboat where Lightoller and the others were clinging. He survived, but his father did not. Jack spent the rest of his life haunted by what he had seen. He described the water as a kind of hell, not fire. He said the bodies around him moved in slow motion, drifting like ghosts. Some reached out to him as he swam past. He did not stop. He could not stop. If he stopped, he would die. In 1945, 33 years after the sinking, Jack Thayer's son was killed in the Pacific during World War II. Jack fell into a deep depression. He began writing about the Titanic again, about the night, about the cold, about the bodies, about his father. He wrote that he had been living with the guilt for 3 decades, that he should have tried harder to find his father, that he should have stayed in the water longer, that he should have done something, anything. In September of 1945, Jack Thayer slit his wrists and bled to death in his car. His suicide note mentioned the Titanic. He said he was ready to see his father again. He said he had been waiting long enough. The bodies left in the water did not stay there. In the days after the sinking, the White Star Line hired ships to recover the dead. They found 328. Most were buried at sea. Some were brought back to Halifax, Nova Scotia, and buried in mass graves. But more than 1,000 were never found. They sank. The life jackets, made of cork, eventually absorbed water and lost buoyancy. The bodies drifted down, 2,000 feet, 3,000. Some came to rest on the ocean floor near the wreck. Others were carried away by currents, scattered across the Atlantic, lost forever. The survivors did not talk about this. They did not talk about the bodies that were never recovered. They did not talk about the husbands and wives and children who were still down there, in the dark, in the cold. They moved on. They remarried. They had children. They grew old. But they did not forget. They could not forget, because every time they closed their eyes, they were back in the lifeboat, rowing away, listening to the screaming, watching the bodies drift past, and knowing somewhere deep inside that they had survived because someone else had died, that there had been empty seats, that they could have gone back, that they chose not to. In 1985, 73 years after the sinking, Robert Ballard discovered the wreck of the Titanic. It sits on the ocean floor in two pieces, the bow and the stern separated by 2,000 feet. The ship is covered in rust, decayed, collapsing. Around it, scattered across the seabed, are the remnants of that night. Shoes, dishes, suitcases, toys, and bones. Human bones. Not many. The ocean has taken most, but some remain, lying where they fell, 2.5 miles below the surface. In the cold, in the dark, in the silence. The last survivor of the Titanic, Milvina Dean, died in 2009. She was 9 weeks old when the ship sank. She had no memory of it, but she spent her entire life defined by it. Everywhere she went, people asked her about the Titanic, about the sinking, about the cold, about the screaming. She said she was tired of it, tired of being a symbol, tired of representing something she could not remember. But she understood. She understood that the Titanic was not just a ship. It was a wound, a scar on the collective memory of humanity, a reminder of what happens when we believe we are unsinkable. The survivors are all gone now, but the story remains. Not the story of the ship, the story of the water, of the 1,500 people who died there, of the 700 who watched, of the screaming that lasted 2 hours and the silence that has lasted a century, of the guilt that some carried to their graves, of the nightmares that never stopped, of the bodies that were never found, of the cold that never went away, because that is what haunted them, not the ship, not the iceberg, not the tragedy, the water, the black, freezing water, and the people in it, reaching, screaming, dying, while the lifeboats rowed away. If you are still here, still listening, still thinking about what those survivors saw, what they heard, what they carried with them until their last breath, then you understand. History is not dates and facts. It is people. It is pain. It is memory. And some memories do not fade. Some memories do not heal. Some memories stay in the water, forever, reaching, screaming, waiting. The Titanic sank on April 15th, 1912. But for the survivors, it never stopped sinking. Every night, every dream, every moment of silence, they were back in the lifeboat, rowing away, listening, and the screaming never stopped. Not really. It just got quieter, until one by one, the survivors closed their eyes for the last time. And finally, mercifully, the water let them go.